There's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fist at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game. Gonna crack down, and shut down, the sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Happy Friday to you, everybody. Glad you could join us. It is just a game. I am me, you are you. Everybody knows everybody, so and everybody's welcome here. It is an inclusive podcast. We are broadcasting live from Treaty 7 territory. We started the week talking about how a sporting event can bring a country together, and we saw that last weekend, the RBC Open. We end the week, unfortunately, talking about how a tragedy brings a nation together. We, of course, it doesn't seem like enough. It almost seems hollow, but just letting people know in Manitoba who have family in the Dauphin area, anybody that may be connected to the tragedy that took place on the highways yesterday, we're thinking about you. We will help. We have to help. That's what we do. But it's another moment in time in which our country comes together and helps each other, and just reminder again, like we need it. Nobody needs it, but how precious life is, and another opportunity for us to tip our hats and thank first responders. So anybody that's listening to this podcast, watching the streaming today, or whatever, if you get a chance. You see a fireman, you see a police officer, you see a paramedic, you see anybody that's anybody that in that line of work, the work they do, please thank them. And again, we're here. We know we'll come together. We always do. But thinking about our friends in Manitoba today. Since we last spoke, again, credit to Danny Austin and Cami Kepke for coming in and continually raising the bar and forcing me to come back and do better shows than I can. And today, I think I got a good one for you. Today, I think I got the show of shows, because I got if I had to pick, if there was a draft of NHL insiders and analysts, and I had only two picks, it would go 1-2 the way it's slotted today. The legendary voice of the Calgary Flames, Peter Maher, will join us. Eric Duhatschek will join us. So that is the show. It will have a heavy hockey-centric, Calgary Flames-centric feel to it today. But I will point out that Danny and Cami are coming back in on Monday, and then I'll be back for Wednesday, Friday next week. Just for no other, please do not interpret my absences as disinterest or anything like that. I'm just quite the opposite, actually. I'm just blessed right now to be very busy with work on my consulting side, and very lucky to have access to Danny and Cami who can come in and carry the show for me. So that's all it is. And then once we get past free agency, we might slow her down just a little bit for the summertime, because you do too. We all do, right? That's a Calgary tradition. But having said that, we've got some busy days ahead in the hockey world, of which we will share with both of our insiders today. And we'll get to our first one momentarily. I'd be remiss if I didn't just start off on two things that I want to mention. Tonight at Winsport, and again, I full declaration of where my interests lie. I do work for the Calgary Surge, building out their community programming, but I have to tell you how much fun I am having, because I do go to the games and I help out wherever I can, but just watching basketball be embraced by this city, the energy, the just the passion that people are showing, seeing familiar and the same faces coming to all the games is amazing. And I'm a convert. If you've heard about this FIBA target score, this FIBA target score is incredible. So the first break with 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, they add 9 points to the highest point total. So whoever's leading, they add 9 points, and whichever team gets there wins. And it was the Vancouver Bandits and the Surge on Wednesday. And at one point I was talking to Jack, who was there, and it was in the fourth quarter, and Jack, the Surge were down 20 points.
Yeah.
Right.
You had written them off.
I had written. Thank you, Jack. Yep.
You're
thanks,
ready to
Jack.
go home.
I was ready to go home. I said, Jack, it's done. They'll never come back. And what happened?
They came back.
They led. They led at one point. Yeah. They did not win, but they led. But have I said anything out of school?
No.
It's a fun atmosphere. They're good athletes. It's just a good overall product and should be checked out.
Yes, it definitely should. People get out there.
Don't take RJ.
Yeah.
Don't take our other producer, RJ. He's not here to defend himself. Who didn't have much basketball training, I guess would be.
Yeah.
Wanted to know why there were so many penalties.
Penalty shots.
Yeah.
Didn't like the coaches walking on the floor. Wants boards put up.
Well, I didn't like the Vancouver coach wearing jeans.
Yeah.
That I don't know why. That usually doesn't bother me, but that kind of bugged me. I don't know why. It just bugged me. But it was fun, right?
Yeah, tons of fun.
And you come back, right?
Oh, for sure.
There you go.
For
if
sure.
you cannot trust Jack, who can you trust? So Jack says go. Tonight, and then on Sunday as well, Sunday afternoon. The other thing I'll mention, and then we are going to get right to our guest, and he's going to talk about it too. I was a little caught off guard, a little surprised that Jerome Iginla is the special assistant to the general manager, but it makes sense. I'm happy for Craig. I know Craig, and I know how Craig works, and bringing in Jerome, you know what, the heck with it, because Pete's going to say it way better than I can say it, and he knows exactly what I'm going to say. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to let you know our next guest is brought to you by the Ski Sellers, skisellers.com, skisellers.snowboard.com. 76 years in our city, 76, all the way back to 1946, 76 years in our city. One location right now, four locations in the winter, one location, McLeod Trail by Chinook Center. We do bring in the 7-time Hall of Famer, the man, the myth, the legend, the greatest that's ever done it. Peter Maher joins us. And Pete, I was going to just step all over myself and talk about Jerome Iginla and Craig Conroy, but I'd rather you do it because it'll come with a greater sense of authority and purpose. But I like this. I mean, why wouldn't you want Jerome Iginla? But I like it because of who the two guys are. Because there are going to be some really heated conversations, because those two have really heated conversations.
They do, and then they walk away smiling at each other, having solved the problem or potentially solved the problem. No, I think it's outstanding that Jerome is coming back into the Flame fold as the executive assistant or special assistant to GM Craig Conroy. I think it's just an absolutely outstanding decision on the part of the team. Now, he's not going to be able to be here on a full-time basis this year. He's going to be coaching his son's team in Kelowna, and then I'm almost certain that after this year he'll be on full-time here with the Flames. Yeah. But knowing Jerome, I'm sure that as often as he can get to be around the Flames, he's going to do that this coming season. And he's going to be very, very helpful to the management, to the coaches, and to the players. And I think just having him around the players is going to be a real positive influence. Going back to the fact that I was able to have the privilege of seeing him play every game that he played with the Flames, every goal that he scored and all of that stuff, but even more so, seeing how he reacts off the ice. I mean, he was available for interviews after every single game. The Flames could have lost a game 10-0. Jerome would stand out in front of the media and do an interview. It didn't matter whether he had a good night, medium night, or a bad night. He was always available. And he's always had that, I know, talking to players that were around him, that in the dressing room, he was a very serious guy, but he has that upbeat personality about him that I think is going to be very infectious to the players on this Flame team when they see how Jerome is and how accessible he is to fans. I mean, I don't know how many times that when the Flames were on the road, that the bus would be held. He would come out of the hotel 10 minutes before the bus was to leave, or maybe 15 minutes before to leave, to sign autographs for the fans that were in front of the hotel where the team was. And he'd come out there and sign them, get on the bus. And sometimes the bus had to leave a little bit late while Jerome signed those. He would do that after games as well. And the night that really stands out for me was back in 2004, the night the Flames won the Western Conference Championship, or whatever it was called then, beating San Jose in Game 6. I remember, Rob, you and I were doing, with Mike Rogers and others, doing the post-game show in the Hot Stove Lounge. And we went on there for about an hour and a half. And I remember going outside after. It was raining, but there was Jerome in the middle of the parking lot in the back end of the Saddle Dome where the players parked their cars. He was surrounded by a bunch of kids. He was not only signing autographs for them, but he was asking them questions. How are you doing in school? And things like that. Yep. And, that was a night for celebrating. And I'm sure that Jerome eventually caught up to his teammates. But he had time for these fans and to sign autographs and ask them questions and that sort of thing on a night when it was a big celebration for the team. So, and also, the way he played the game is going to be something that's going to be very helpful to the Flames. So it's outstanding he's back in the Flame organization. You have to wonder if maybe more Flames alumni will end up being part of the coaching staff. But, you've got Alex Tanguay as coaching history, and he and Jerome also are pretty good friends. Because they were line mates with the Flames earlier on. And also another guy is Mark Savard, who played with Jerome back in the early 80s before he got traded. He has a coaching experience. So it's going to be real interesting to see what's going to develop here with the Flames. But having Jerome on board again is just absolutely phenomenal.
So two things. One, I want to try and thread a bit of a needle here, Pete. So I'm going to call on you for a little bit of help with this. When you talk about how Jerome dealt or would make himself available to the public, it's important people understand he didn't seek that out. That was not what he did. And if he was probably, given sodium pentothal, he'd probably tell you that, I really don't want to, I'd rather just go be that. Am I saying it the right way, Pete? Like he did it because
you're absolutely right.
He's the leader of that team.
The spotlight. Yeah, he did not want the spotlight, but he knew that as being one of the top players on the team, and especially after he became captain, that it was a necessity for him to be available to the media. And we've had players in the past, not only with the Flames, but a number of teams, not even talk to the media after games, even if they're captain of the team, when things haven't gone wrong. But Jerome always was there. I mean, he never tried to hide or anything like that. And it wasn't because he wanted the publicity. In fact, he probably would have been better if he did in the back room of the dressing room, changing and showering and getting ready to go out for the evening. But he always made himself available and was always one of the last Flame players to leave the dressing room, because he always did some off ice work after games as well in the Flames training center in the dressing room. But he never wanted charity, or he never wanted the publicity, but he knew that it was incumbent upon him to be there to speak out on behalf of the team when the team won or lost or tied a hockey game. So he's just an outstanding guy. And there are times I've seen him be a bit shy, but he knows that, it's important. He knew it was important to him as a character to be accessible to the media, to the fans, and all of that sort of thing. It was he and Lanny McDonald pretty much are two of the only players that I ever saw. And of course, I was with Lanny when he was in Toronto, and here when he was with the Flames. They always would hold up the bus while these guys signed autographs. Even though the team was scheduled to leave at such and such a time, there were players there, there were fans there that wanted autographs, and those two guys always signed them all. So now we got both of them in the organization. Lanny's not on the management group, but he's part of the Flames alumni, very prominent around the Saddle Dome all the time. So I think this is going to be really good, having another addition, Jerome Iginla, being in the crowd as well.
So now I got a third point. So let me go to the third point, and I'll come back to the second point in a second. The third point was I was ecstatic that they recognized the alumni in the room, which they've done before. But I was ecstatic when Ryan Huska was introduced that the alumni were there. They were mentioned. They were part of the story. Huska talked about meeting Colin Patterson, and I was later informed the next day by Colin Patterson that a 11-year-old Craig Conroy met Colin Patterson too. So Patter was an early influence on both the head coach and general manager of the Calgary Flames. But it made me I like it, Pete. We've got the best alumni in the National Hockey League, and that they should be front and center with this group.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Flames alumni, I mean, I'm probably being a little bit biased here, but I believe the Flames alumni is the best organized alumni in the entire National Hockey League. I mean, Edmonton, you hardly hear anything about the Edmonton alumni. In fact, when they try to have some of these softball games and golf tournaments in the summer in Red Deer and invite the Flames alumni and the Oilers alumni, there's a lot more Flames alumni there than there are Oilers alumni. So it's a real tribute to how positive and how effective the Calgary alumni has been, not only in supporting the current team, but also in the many, many things they do for the various charities throughout the city of Calgary and surrounding areas. I mean, there are all kinds of things that don't get much publicity, but are helpful to various organizations and charity groups within our city on behalf of the Flames alumni. They just pick it up right where the Flames hockey team also is very active in giving out donations and helping out in charities and that type of thing. And the alumni follows right through. And the alumni is always there. If there's a guy on the team that wants to talk to an alumni guy, they always make themselves available to go in there and encourage them to help make them better or anything, that question that they would have. So, yes, it was very nice of Ryan Huska that day that he was announced as coach of the team to recognize the Flames alumni and the many of the guys that were there in the background. The media, of course, were always in the front, as it should have been, but the alumni guys were in the back showing support for the naming of the new Flame coach, who was up on the podium there with the new general manager, Craig Conroy, who's also, of course, a member of the Flames alumni.
Okay, so now go back to the point, my second point. Because the title is the same, when Craig Conroy retired, he became special assistant to the general manager for Jay Feaster. Is that the blueprint for what we should expect for Jerome? Because Craig did a little bit of everything, didn't he? He was on the ice for practices. He went down to the mine. Now, you've already established he's, year one, Jerome's going to be coaching his son and in Kelowna. But do we expect him to kind of have those, roles in all the different departments to try to get acclimatized?
I would guess so, Rob. I would think that he's going to be very active in that sort of thing with the Flames, even going on the ice with the players, following pretty much in the role that Conroy did when he was appointed about 11 years ago to that the same position, special assistant to the general manager. He also had some other titles there, but I think the same thing is going to be done with Jerome, and I think that's going to be extremely positive because Jerome, as I was mentioning earlier, the character that he is, it's going to help rub off on some of the players, and he can also show them some of the little tricks that he had when he was playing the game. So I expect him to be, when he can be around the team, and be very, very on the ice, off the ice, and also probably go down and check out with the minor league team is here in Calgary, so he doesn't have far to go.
He doesn't have to go very far, no.
So I expect him to be very, very active in all areas with regard to the team, time permitting. Now, obviously, this year he's not going to have as much time as he will have in the future. I firmly believe he's going to have a full-time job here after this season, but as you mentioned, he's coaching his son's team there in Kelowna, and I think that's going to take the number one priority. But I'm knowing Jerome, I know he's going to get here a lot more than you might expect, even though he has those other potential other situations that he's dealing with in Kelowna. But I know him; he will be around this team quite a bit and will be most helpful. I'm sure he'll make the odd road trip when he can, also, and that will be another way for him to show the players how they should act, and have a little bit of pointers with them, always in a positive vein.
I do like to show attribution wherever I can, but I have to apologize to our peers because I can't remember who got the quote from Craig Conroy, but Conroy talked yesterday about having someone in the room that will push back. And I thought that gave a little insight into what kind of leader he is. And by pushback, I mean, if they're talking about a player, You don't have to agree with me. Push me on it. And I always think that's and I think Brad Treliving was that way. I think Craig Conroy's just maybe picking it up from him. But I thought that was a little insight on what to expect in an administration run by Conroy. Is there will be healthy debate.
Yes, and I think you're going to see a situation where Coach Huska and Coach Conroy will have a lot more interaction than Daryl Sutter did with Brad Treliving, particularly in the second season here when there seemed to be a big fallout there along the way in the internal, not only between manager and coach, but among the players. I'm still a guy that felt that some of the players should have been able to put out a little bit better effort to at least get themselves in the playoffs, even though they had their difficulties or disinterest with the coach. But anyway, that's gone now, so they're going to stepping ahead in a new forum. I do expect Conroy and Huska to have a chat at least once a day. And probably more than that to discuss things. The manager makes the moves to get the players, but he generally always goes to the coach and says, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Do you think we should make this deal or not make this deal and that sort of thing? So I think we're going to have a lot more of that. And also, you're not going to have a situation where you're going to have the players involved in that sort of thing. But I think there's going to be more conversation between the coaching staff, management, and the players on the team. And I think that's going to lead to a very positive atmosphere with the Flames, and hopefully that carries out on the ice to have a team have a great success this next season. So I kind of like the positive upbeat with the people now that are around the team in the high managerial positions, starting with Maloney and Conroy, and now Iginla's in there, and there's a whole bunch of others in there who are also very well adapted to having that type of atmosphere. So I think it's all positive the way things are going right now for the Flames.
Pete, last weekend and early part of this week belonged to Ryan Huska. He becomes the 24th coach for the Calgary Flames. Thoughts on Ryan Huska, what you heard from him, what you've seen from him so far, but also, going with a first-time NHL head coach. Lots of time in the minors, right? But
yeah. I don't know him very well. I met him a couple of times, had brief conversations with him. But he struck me as wearing a very positive, upbeat kind of guy in those very short sessions that I had with him. My only thing, and it goes back to something we talked about the last time we was on this show, is that where you're promoting an assistant coach into the head coaching role after Daryl Sutter has been the coach. And we all remember, well, at least you and I remember, and I'm sure a number of other people do as well, when Daryl stepped down as coach to concentrate being fully on general manager in 2006 and appointed Jim Playfair as the head coach of the team. Jim had been the top assistant or associate coach with Daryl for the number of years that he was coaching the Flame team. And then when Jim came in, of course, he was the guy when he was assisting Daryl, who would go to the players and have to pat them on the back and build them up again after Daryl had kind of knocked them down a peg or two. And then, of course, Jim came in as coach, and he didn't have the same approach as Daryl. He wasn't nearly as hard on them as Daryl was, but he had to have a stronger stance on them. And I know there were players on the team that came to me and said, we don't know who this guy is. Last year, we thought, in the year before that, we thought that he was a nice guy, a good guy, our friend. And now he's in here and he's, yelling this, yelling that, and not in a, and that sort of thing. So that's the only thing I'm a little bit concerned about. And I know Craig Conroy was part of that team in 06, 07. He came back to the Flames late in that season. So he would have seen some of that atmosphere that was there with the team. And of course, after Jim had coached the team for 1 year, he was replaced as head coach, and Mike Keenan came in as the head coach, which was another move, was not particularly great. But, then Jim went back to being an assistant coach of the team, and he was the guy that was basically drawing up the game plans for the team. And Mike was the guy that was, I had players on the team come to me and say, Mike Keenan knows nothing about hockey. Yeah. And I tended to say, well, gee, he's won a Stanley Cup, and he's been to the finals like 4 times or whatever it was. They said all he does is he badgers us all the time, and not in a Badger Johnson type of way.
No.
And but anyway, that's my little thing that I'm a little bit concerned about. But hopefully that's not going to be the case here. And but this guy has certainly earned his right. 9 years in the organization with the farm team, and then the last 5 years with the Flames. So he certainly he certainly has earned the right to be a head coach in the National Hockey League with this team, given his yeoman service to it. And I'm sure that it's been pointed out to him the things that happened in the past with regard to what we talked about there earlier when replacing Daryl, and I'm sure he'll be cognizant of that once he starts greeting the players when he probably meets with them either by phone or Zoom or personally over the off season here, and then when they get here for training camp in September.
I wonder, Pete, how much a difference it makes that it's Daryl moved up and became general manager, and Jim moved under Daryl. In this case, you know, Craig comes in and Ryan moves up. I wonder if that has, you know, if that's kind of different or makes any kind of difference.
Yeah, it does make it a little bit of a difference for sure. No question about that, because Daryl was always around, and he probably was pushing Jim a little bit too to be, a bit of a hard guy with his players to get the maximum out of them. So that's not going to be the case this time. And as we talked about earlier, he's got some very positive people in the management group there that are going to be encouraging him as he goes along. So, perhaps we won't have a similar situation to what we had in 06, 07 with this type of coach. And, you hear the commentaries from some of the players now, Anderson, Rasmus Anderson, certainly has had some interesting comments about when Huska was coaching him in Stockton or in the American Hockey League or wherever it was he was coaching him. And he was not in shape and all of that sort of thing. But the Flames had high hopes for him, and the Huskers took him under his wing and was very hard with him. But he taught him how to be disciplined and how to get himself into shape. And he's become one of the top defensemen on the team, if not one of the top defensemen in the NHL when going forward. I think this guy has a tremendous potential. So, have that as a positive situation. And the guys that he worked with last year and the year before that, on the coaching staff, the other players on the team all seem to be very high in their praise of the work of Ryan Huskis and the way that he approached them and the way that he handled things as a assistant coach with the team, particularly the defenseman, which he was primed for, and penalty killing and that type of thing. So, there was all kinds of positives out there right now, and now you get into training camp. Hopefully it will stay that way. I mean, there's going to be some times when he's going to have to be tough on them, but that's all part of getting the maximum out of players. But hopefully it doesn't have a negative effect on them.
One of the things we can expect is there will be a captain on this team in this coming season. I don't get a vote. I'd like to see Michael Bachman become that captain. But since the last time we spoke, we found out that Bachman one of 3 finalists for the King Clancy Award.
Yeah, and very worthy of that. Hopefully he will win that award when they have the presentation in Nashville. Was the next week or the week after?
Yeah.
And he certainly is at least deserving of it for his entire time. I was here when he first joined the Flames, and even then I knew how you could see how much of a person he was with regard to looking out for others. And he's done an awful lot of community work in Calgary, and I'm sure you probably know more about it than I do, Rob, since I've been on the sideline from that sort of thing, or at least not as active as I used to be. But I'm sure you can vouch for the fact that he's made himself available for so many great charity events and helping out other people. And I know he helped me out as a broadcaster from time to time. There'd be some issues that nothing major, but you'd ask him about something and he'd be very helpful with that. And from what I can gather, was also continued on doing that in his last bunch of years with the team as well. And the fact that he won the award named as a good guy award named in my honor, which I don't know why they call me a good guy, but anyway, that's another story for another day. But the media voted him as the co-winner of that award this year. And as they say, he's a guy that's always been another guy, like we talked about Jerome. This is a guy that always made himself available to the media, win or lose. So hopefully he can get that King Clancy Award and follow in the footsteps of Lanny McDonald, Joe Nieuwendyk, and Jerome Iginla, who are past Flame winners of that King Clancy Award. And, I got to know King Clancy quite well when I was working play-by-play with the Maple Leafs at that time. King Clancy was kind of the right arm or left arm of Harold Ballard. They would go everywhere together. And King was a very, very positive, fun, offbeat guy to be, and always a giving guy. He was another guy that was always available for charities, for fans, and all that type of thing. And so the adapt that they have this award named after King Clancy, and hopefully Michael Bachman can have his name on that trophy next week.
Well, for the record, nobody asked me, but I was going to suggest the Peter Maher Bonesaw Award, but they didn't. Nobody asked me. Just on Michael, he and his wife Frida really, in many ways, have picked up the gauntlet that Mark Giordano and his wife Lauren put down, and others, and that would go all the way back to Lanny and Ardell. They're both so giving. One of the friends in the groups that I work with, Parachutes for Pets, they've absolutely been incredible and have been the biggest ambassadors and have done so much for them. Special Olympics, he's always at Special Olympics events and hosting Special Olympians. But I personally, again, you have personal stories. I go back to my first Control F camp. He was our first guest, and he came out and signed autographs for all the kids at the camp and took pictures and everything like that, and did it with a smile, and just exactly what we were talking about with Jerome, 20 minutes ago. So there is a through point there, I would say, Pete. There is a through point.
Yes, there's no question about that. He is deserving of being a finalist for that award, and hopefully he can edge out a couple of other guys there that
Undersley and Darnell Nurse.
Yeah, those are the two other guys. So hopefully he can edge them out and win the award. Of course, we can't speak much for those other two guys, not being around them, but we can certainly have high praise for the work that Michael Bachman does above and beyond the game of hockey, and very deserving of at least being a finalist and hopefully the winner.
Busy times ahead for the Calgary Flames. We're in that crazy season. The Stanley Cup Finals over. We'll get to that in a second. But ahead of the draft, we know about free agency. We know about free agency next year. So we're already talking about players who aren't free agents this year but could be next year. Pete, we're starting to hear some Flames names in the news.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be some resolutions to this situation, I would say, in the near future. The Flames have 7 players who going into the final year of their contract, so they can be given extensions or can be offered extensions, and if they want it, or they can sign them, and if not, then it's going to create a big decision within the Flame camp. And you talk about Michael Bachman. He's one of those players in that group. Even though he's played his entire career with the Flames here, there's no guarantee that he will be a Flame forever, although it would be nice if that could be the case. Elias Lindholm is another centerman who is in that situation. And he might be the prime one right now because the team is really anxious to have him signed to a long-term contract extension. And, at the exit meetings of the players, he was a little bit tentative as to whether or not he would be returning. And I think what needed to happen was get the general manager in place and then get the coach in place. And then you can approach the players, because then at least you know what your staff is going to be. And I think that's important in those guys determining whether or not they want to come back to the team. So hopefully those signings of Conroy as the general manager, and even with Jerome coming into the camp, and then of course Ryan Huska as the coach, they're certainly aware of them. And now it's the fact that the GM, the management team, have to go after them and find out just exactly what these guys feel with regard to having contract extensions. Others in that group are there's Toffoli and Dubé and Hanifin, Tanev and Zadorov. And, if these guys are not going to, if you offer them all deals and they don't agree to them and won't sign, then I think you've got to move them now. You have to move them in the summer, either at the draft or soon after that, to get full value for them. Because some people will say, well, why don't you just wait and see how things are going at the trade deadline? The problem is you get to the trade deadline, if the team is in a good position in the standings, going to make the playoffs, you start trying to make moves, and you really hinder the chemistry on the team, and the team then could go backwards and not have the type of finish that you need to have. So, and I think there's more value can be gained in return in making moves for these guys right now. I think Lindholm right now and Hanifin are two guys that they can probably get a pretty good return for. When you consider the free agent market for this year with regard to high name players is not nearly as good as it has been in the past. So if these guys are available in trade, there's going to be a number of teams that would be interested in, particularly those two guys, and even Toffoli after the outstanding season that he had this year. So I'm sure right now the Flames management is busy trying to get those things sealed up as they get set to head to the NHL draft in Nashville.
Yeah, and I know there's a report today from Pierre LeBrun in The Athletic, and he is reporting that Noah Hanifin has no intention of extending his contract. And now that explains why his name is out there. I don't know if that, the fact that he, won't extend, if that hurts your leverage or whatever. It's too bad because I like him as a defenseman. He's certainly, he's still young. Like, he is still a young defenseman with a lot of experience. And Elias Lindholm, those are the two names you brought up. If you don't have Lindholm, all of a sudden you become very thin down the middle. And now, you finding number one centermen in this league are not easy. And, I think Elias Lindholm is a number one centerman. I don't know if he's, in the top 10 or however you want to debate it, but for the Calgary Flames, he's definitely a number one center.
Yeah, no question about that. No question. I think they've got to try their hardest to get him signed. I would say the same thing for Hanifin, but maybe not as much. But Hanifin would, of course, be a big loss to the team, and it sounds as though that he's not going to be willing to sign to a long-term agreement here. So if that's the case, and you're hearing his name out there quite prominently in the last few days in trade speculation, but Lindholm is a guy you definitely, the Flames do have a number of other defensemen on the roster and also within their system that are going to be around for training camp this year. So it may not hurt as much to lose him, although I certainly would like to keep him. But Lindholm is a guy you've really got to focus on and try to convince him to stay here with this team. Now, in addition to the management, coaching staff, that situation all being settled, and Lindholm can make a decision with regard to that. The other thing is that Lindholm, I think, has to be in his own mind confident that this team can be a contender for the Stanley Cup. And, that I'm sure his agents are very quietly going about seeing what other teams are interested. And within that group, seeking to see if maybe down the road, that might be a better team for him to go to that would have a better chance for the Cup. So the Flames, in addition to having management and coaching staff in there that maybe is acceptable, Lindholm have to convince them that the team itself is going to be a contender, and not only for this coming year, but for the years beyond that as well. So it's a real sell job that has to be done to convince him to remain here with the team. But as I say, if they can't do that right away here now, between now and the end of the month, then it's time to move him on for sure.
Outside of Nevada, I would suggest that this was a somewhat of a disappointing Stanley Cup final, or maybe forgettable Stanley Cup final. But Vegas wins it 6 years into the league. Credit them. And they do it with some original players. They do it with Jack Eichel, who that becomes a really incredible story now, right? The guy behind Connor McDavid, who was injured, and Buffalo didn't want him to get, the surgery that he got. A lot of credit to this Vegas organization, Peter.
Yeah, there's no question. They did a wonderful job putting that team together, and they made a whole bunch of changes. Even the first year they're in the league, they get to the final. Then after that, they make a whole bunch of other changes and augment their lineup. And they took a gamble on Eichel, or the Buffalo didn't want him to have that surgery. They wouldn't endorse it, so he did it on his own. And of course, then a number of other teams were a little bit leery of signing him after having that major surgery that he had. But Vegas was willing to take a chance on him, and he turned out to be one of their top players in the playoffs. And it's another interesting aspect of it, and I think I mentioned it the last time I was on, is that there were more Canadian players on the Vegas team than any other team that was in the playoffs. And when I was making my bold prediction on the Stanley Cup final, I had to decide between Matthew Tkachuk's Florida Panthers or those many Canadian players that were on the Vegas team. So I hedged toward Vegas, and it turns out now I'm right in 8 of the 16 playoff series that we had this year. So I didn't have a great record, but at least we got the final right. And, it goes back, Rob, I was talking the last time I was on here about this deal about just get into the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting, because I always was under the impression that you have to have a good team, even if to have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And Vegas winning the Cup kind of steered me back into that direction, that I'd rather have a team that is really good rather than the team that just makes the playoffs. Now, there is exceptions where teams that just make the playoffs go on and win the Stanley Cup, as St. Louis Blues did in 2018, and the Los Angeles Kings did with Daryl Sutter as coach in 2012. But very, very rarely does a team that's not among the top 8 or 10 in overall standing in the NHL win the Cup. And this past season, Vegas finished 5th overall, the number 1 team within their own division, and ultimately they went on to win the Cup. Now, Florida, of course, was an outstanding Cinderella story, the fact that they barely get into the playoffs. In fact, they had one less point than the Flames had, but they got themselves into the playoffs and then went on a tremendous run, upsetting 3 teams and getting into the final before they kind of had nothing left to defend against a team like Vegas that was so deep in depth, both on forwards and defense. And of course, they win with a goaltender from Calgary, who was, I think, their 4th string goaltender when the season started. So definitely an incredible story for the Vegas team to go on and win the Stanley Cup. And I'm starting to think if you're building a team, build to win. Don't build to just get in. Now, if you just get in, you'll take it. You'll take it. But I think you've got a better chance to win it all if you have one of the better teams during the regular season.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, Peter, because I love the Adin Hill story. But again, not a guy that anybody thought about at the beginning of the year as a difference maker, but he finds himself there and he is a difference maker. But we were always told you build a team from the goaltender out. Like, is one of the craziest things that people are going to forget is that Jonathan Quick now has 3 Stanley Cup rings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Like, I forgot all about him. And then he's on the ice getting his moment with the cup. And I'm like, holy cow. Remember how mad he was to go to Columbus? Like, they pissed him off, and then the Columbus flips him to Vegas, and now he's got a cup ring, right?
And Vegas only took them as goaltending insurance because they were having all these injuries to the other guys and were fearful they might have more. And he ends up being a guy on the ice lifting the Stanley Cup above his head, although he didn't play in the final or any of the playoffs, I guess. But he was a member of that team after being basically the Kings gave up on him and Columbus gave up on him. So, another really amazing story.
But did he not have an incredible run until Calgary knocked him off during the regular season? Didn't he got hot, Jack, didn't he?
Yeah, he came in and played a bit, I think, and then the Flames.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did have a good run there. You're right. Absolutely. Yeah. When he got in there, had a really solid run there of victories or non-losses. So, yeah, he was playing really well when he went there. And it was hard to believe that LA, who was in a playoff run as well, even though they had another goalie that was playing better than him, didn't keep him around just in case. So, I tell you just never know about these things. And you always say, the team that has the best goaltender is going to win. The way it went this year, not necessarily so.
But I don't know if this is it 2010, the Niemi? No, is it Leighton and who was the goalie with Chicago? Was it Niemi?
Crawford?
No, it was before Crawford.
So before.
You remember it was Chicago and Philadelphia. It was Michael Leighton in Philadelphia. And I want to say
it was Niemi.
Niemi, right? In that Stanley Cup final.
It was. Yes, yep.
And then they walked away from Niemi. Like, they walked away from him. He ended up in San Jose that year, right?
That's right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So you just never know about these things. As you say, you go in saying, well, the team with the best goalie is going to win, but sometimes that's not always the case. So there's always really strange things that develop. That's why they play the game, Rob.
That's why they play the game, Pete. Depth on the blue line. You can never have enough depth on the blue line. We are about a week away, too, from Hall of Fame. Now, the Hockey Hall of Fame selections, correct?
Yes, next Wednesday. The group gets together in Toronto, the 18-member panel, to select the 2023 candidates to be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Now, of those 18 voters, they have to have 75% of the vote to gain at least 75% of the vote to gain entry into the Hall of Fame. So it's going to be interesting to see how things go next Wednesday when Lanny McDonald, of course, who is the chairman of the Hall of Fame, will be in there making phone calls to the people that have been selected for the Hall of Fame this year. And of course, when I look at it as 2 guys with the Flames that I think have been overlooked a number of times now. And hopefully this time they get the call. One of them is Mike Vernon, 2-time Stanley Cup winner, winning with the Flames here in '89 and also winning with Detroit when he won the Conn Smythe Trophy as MVP. He could have been the MVP of the Flames win in '89 as well. As I understand it, he lost by only 1 vote to teammate Al MacKinnis when the Flames won that cup in '89. And of course, the other is Theo Fleury, who I believe now has been rejected 11 times by the Hockey Hall of Fame. To me, I always had a strong feeling that Jerome was worthy, or sorry, Theo was worthy of the Hall of Fame, but he was overlooked. But when all these times, but the year that Paul Kariya was elected into the Hockey Hall of Fame, that's when I became totally convinced that Theo belongs in the Hockey Hall of Fame. He has better credentials. Nothing wrong with what Paul Kariya accomplished during his career, but Jerome's credentials are much better. And nonetheless, he's been overlooked. In fact, an interesting stat here is that of the players in the NHL who played over 1,000 regular season games and also over 100 playoff games, the only player, there are 11 players in that group in the NHL. And the only one of that 11 that's not in the Hockey Hall of Fame is Theo Fleury. So hopefully that will be on the table when they meet in Toronto next Wednesday and take that into consideration. It seems like this is going to be a year. They haven't selected many goaltenders to the Hall in recent times. Last year they had Luongo come in as a Hall of Famer, and many are expecting that Henrik Lundqvist could be a first ballot Hall of Famer because he's eligible for the first time this year. So that's a possibility. And other people are also pushing for Curtis Joseph to get into the Hall of Fame. And as I mentioned, we've got Mike Vernon, a guy that's been overlooked several times as well. So those are the ones that I'm looking at that have the opportunity on the Flames situation. And also among the forwards, I think it's about time they had Alexander McGillney into the Hall of Fame. He's been rejected 14 times now. And this is a guy that had a remarkable career. Now, I don't know if this is a fact, so I'm going to preface my comment with that. Some people have suggested that the reason why he's never been elected to the Hall of Fame is that he won't go to the Hall of Fame ceremony. Now, I don't know, as I say, if that is true or not. Even if it is true, I don't think it's a good reason not to induct him to the Hall of Fame. He certainly has the credentials for that. Others that will be in the running, I'm sure, are Pierre Turgeon. He's been rejected 12 times. You've got Henrik Zetterberg, most valuable player in 2008 in the Stanley Cup playoffs, cup winner several times with Detroit. Rod Brindamore, the coach of the Carolina Hurricanes, is a player that I think has a shot at getting in. And, a guy that's on the ballot for the first time that might be a possibility is another former Flame in Jay Bouwmeester. This is a guy that he's a Triple Crown winner. He's won a World Championship. He's won a Olympic gold medal, and he's won a Stanley Cup. So, going to be real interesting to see what comes out of that. And of course, on the women's side, you've got Jennifer Botterill, who we see often on television on the Sportnet coverage. She is a 3-time gold medal winner in the Olympics, and also has got 5 gold medals for the World Championships, twice the most valuable player. You've got Megan Duggan from the United States, who won 7 World Championships with the U.S. team, and of course, there's Caroline Ouellette, a 3-time gold medal winner for Canada. So it's going to be real interesting there. Among the builders, you might have a guy that might maybe a former Flame assistant general manager, David Poyle, could be in the running. He's retiring now as the general manager of the Nashville Predators. And when the Flames came to Calgary, he was the assistant GM of the Flames to Cliff Fletcher, and he had served with Cliff a number of years in Atlanta as well. Then he went on to be a general manager in Washington, and then general manager in Nashville. So he's been around the NHL for about 40 years in a managerial situation. So I think he would be a guy that could get himself inducted as a builder. And it wouldn't surprise me if not, maybe not this year, but down the road, that the Flames majority owner Murray Edwards is a guy that's considered for the building role in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
I think he will be because of his work in the the creation of the CBA, right? He guided the last 2, did he not?
Yes, he did. Yep. So I've got a real strong feeling that if not this year, down the road, Murray's going to be a guy that's going to be inducted as a builder.
And I know the Hall of Fame's always a hot topic, and everybody's got hot takes on it. Pete, am I close? Like I'm here, I'm listening to you talk about Poyle, and I believe that absolutely David Poyle should be there. What about Al McNeil?
Yeah, Al would be a guy considered. He's been around the game a long, long time. He's a Stanley Cup winner as a coach with the Montreal Canadiens. And I think he won, I don't know how many American Hockey League championships he won as a coach when he was handling the Canadiens farm team there in Nova Scotia, and coach for he coached the Atlanta Flames as well as the Calgary Flames, and I would think that he's a guy that would be in the running from that in that coaches category. Although there's some others out there that would argue that Mike Keenan should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
a few other guys there.
Sure,
but,
no, I get it. I get it.
So that but Al certainly has put in his dues. He's still around the Flames, and even though he's not I don't think he's in a managerial capacity, he's still in there advising management, coaches, and that sort of thing, and has been doing. He's been part of management here since the Flames came, which are either a coach or in management or around the team for 43 years, plus the other history that I talked about earlier. So I think he should have his name up for at least conversation among that group when they meet on Wednesday.
Yeah, I wish he would, because. And I part of it is it's not the NHL Hall of Fame, it's the Hockey Hall of Fame. And he's had an incredible impact on the game as a coach. You can probably tell this story better than I can, but did he not also play a fairly large role in Al MacKinnis's development too?
Yes, he did. Very, very much. I mean, when Al MacKinnis came to the Flames, he was a first-round draft pick and had some great credentials from playing in the Ontario Junior Hockey League. But his conditioning wasn't exactly the greatest, to say that in the very least. In fact, back in those days, the physical testing that the teams had was the players running around the Stampede Park racetrack.
Yeah.
And the day that Al MacKinnis went out there, or the players with Al MacKinnis, the first time he went out there, he couldn't finish that run around the track. And he'd be the first to admit that to you. But then, of course, Al McNeil was part of the Flames at that point. And, of course, Al was from Nova Scotia, Al McNeil and Al MacKinnis also from Nova Scotia. And Al McNeil took Al MacKinnis under his wing. And very soon after that, a year or two after that, he became one of the top conditioned Flame players every time they came to training camp, and had no trouble racing around the racetrack at Stampede Park. So that's how much of an influence he had on making Al McNeil, making Al MacKinnis a Hockey Hall of Famer. And, of course, a Stanley Cup winner with the Flames, winner of the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the playoffs. He certainly had a lot to do with that, and very quietly had a lot to do with a lot of other players on the Flame team with his, a little bit of pointing this out, pointing that out, and making them better players. So,
and with the Canadiens
guy
too,
that should be under consideration. Yeah,
and with the Canadiens too, he was around Guy Lafleur as a rookie, right?
Yes, he did. Yeah, yes, he did. Yeah, so he was around an awful lot of good players that he groomed in the Montreal system. In fact, the very first hockey game that I ever broadcast, Rob, was at the old Memorial Gardens in Campbellton, New Brunswick, in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
The Nova Scotia Voyageurs came to Campbellton to the official opening of the renovated building. They had renovated it, and they came in for the official reopening of the building, which had been renovated. That was the first game that I broadcast. It was the Nova Scotia Voyageurs against the local team, the Campbellton Tigers. Al McNeil was coach and general manager of that Nova Scotia team, and his top player, his top defenseman, was Larry Robinson, who would, after that, would go on to play in the National Hockey League. So I well remember that night, that time. And, but halfway through the game, Al had to loan the Tigers, had to trade some of his players to the Tigers to get the game close.
Okay. Little things you don't.
Broadcaster's nightmare. Now you got 10 players going from one team to the other, 10 go to the other team. So anyway, that was a funny little anecdote from my first time actually got involved with Al McNeil was back then in 1971.
See, I love
and
stuff.
Then later
like,
he'd go on to be, great things with the Canadiens and so on. So.
But I love stuff like that, Pete. Like people nowadays, sports is so buttoned down. But can you imagine, the Calgary Wranglers are going to go, up to Bentley and play the Generals, or, go to Brooks and play the Bandits or something like that, or like the Cannons, like the Mariners would come and play the Cannons here, right? Like,
yes, right. Yeah.
I love that stuff. I wish we had more of that stuff, right?
Yeah. And sort of the little nuances of not nuances, but particularly outstanding little things of the game that most people haven't ever heard about. So, but that was a very interesting time.
Do you remember the King and his court? Speaking of,
yes, I do. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And I was thinking
about. Still around. I No, they're not still. I'm thinking of the basketball team, but you're talking about the softball team.
I'm talking about the softball team, right?
Yeah,
the
in the picture there.
Yeah. I was thinking about him and Max Patkin. Remember the old Clown Prince of Baseball? And he'd do the minor league circuit. I know he'd come up to Edmonton and do a Trappers weekend or something like that, and he'd just goof around at first base and stuff. Like, I miss that stuff.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I saw them once. I saw them perform, and of course, the Harlem Globetrotters I've seen many times, a few times as well. But yeah, those are all unique things. But yeah, that was pretty amazing back in those days when they had that softball team come around or fastball team come around and play these local teams and so on. So yeah, no, those are all real interesting little tidbits for the game.
And they're fun. Unfortunately, our last story is not fun. Tough. Another tough week in the business that you and I love.
Yeah, Rob, we're seeing the news on a couple of days ago that 1,300 people were let go by Bell Media, and of course 6 radio stations that were owned by Bell Media. They're no longer in operation as they close them down completely, including the sports station in Edmonton, 1260, and of course Funny 1060 here in Calgary, which is a station that I didn't particularly listen to very much or often. Although I did listen to it a few times a couple of years ago when my granddaughter was doing traffic reports on that station in the afternoon. So anyway, but a very, very sad day to have that many people in the media business lose their jobs. Stations totally out of commission now, not even in operation. Others being shifted around in platforms and that sort of thing. It's really, really sad for radio. And this is a business that I grew up listening to. I can remember many nights listening to the radio, listening to hockey games, listening to Danny Gallivan on the radio broadcasting Canadians games, Foster Hewitt broadcasting Leaf games, and even getting Boston Bruin games on the radio in baseball, and New York Yankee games on the radio, then getting into the business myself and having the opportunity to work as many years. I think it was 48 years I worked in the radio business when you consider when I started back in my hometown when I was still going to high school, doing the morning and afternoon sports there. And without that, I wouldn't have had the career that I had. And now to see so many, and this is not the first time there have been reductions made in the sports world here among broadcasters. We've seen it happen both in radio and in television over the last little while. And hopefully we're not going to see any more for a long, long time. But it seems like that's the way things are going. And you have to be interested to see now if Rogers, which has some stations here in Calgary, whether or not they might be following suit. And hopefully not, because you and I know a lot of people in the radio business here that are gainfully employed, doing outstanding jobs there. But you can notice now the trend. Many of the broadcasters, be it radio or television, are doing podcasts now. Some that are out of the business, such as you are, Rob, now into this podcast, doing an outstanding job with that and gaining more and more recognition as it goes. And other people, some of the television people that we see on Sportnet and TSN, they have podcasts going on now. So I guess they're kind of anchoring themselves in case there's their jobs are become not there anymore in the radio television field. So hopefully that's not going to be the case, but it does seem to be a trend that's been ongoing now for a while, and certainly was a big wake up call when that happened a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it a little later in the show, Pete, and I prefer not to go out on a negative, so let me ask you this. Did you say you did morning and afternoon sports while you were going to high school?
Yep, I go in the morning there, Rob, and I do the morning sports up until 8:30. It was a small town, so the school wasn't far away. So then I'd go to the high school and do my morning and afternoon classes. And then when that ended about 3:45, I'd head down to the radio station and do the sports at 5, 5:30, and 6. And so then I'd go home and study for the next day.
That's amazing. I love that. That's fantastic.
That's how I started in the business. And prior to that, how that got started was that I was doing the public address announcing of the local softball league there. They had a real senior softball league that had 4 teams. It was a big thing in the city. It gained a lot of interest, a lot of fans. So I was doing the I lived nearby there, so I was doing the public address system of those games. And then finally, one of the players in the league was the radio station manager, Doug Young, and he came to me and he said, "Why don't you do reports on these games for the radio station?" So I would phone in reports to the radio station after the games were over. They'd run them in the morning, and then my last year of high school, he hired me to go in and be the sports guy. So that's where it started, and but for that, maybe I wouldn't be here today. But that's how it started, and fortunately, it went on to a lot of great things for me, and I'm very, very humbled for the fact that radio was so much part of my career, and now we're seeing what we're seeing with regard to people being let go from these jobs. So we can only hope for the best there. But without radio, I might not be talking to you today, Rob.
And if the name Doug Young, the program director, seems familiar, he was...
Yes, he is a federal minister. Well, not anymore. He's retired now, but he was a federal minister of several different portfolios back in the 90s.
Yeah,
and I think you met him here in Calgary, and he was also at the Hall of Fame.
He was at
in 2006.
That's right. When you got the Foster Hewitt. Oh, by the way, do you know who's directly responsible for this year's Foster Hewitt Award winner?
There's a committee selected of past.
No. That's the wrong
broadcasters.
Answer. That's the wrong answer, Pete. The man who is completely responsible for this year's Foster Hewitt Award winner is hockey legend Perry Berezan.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yes,
right.
Yes.
It's Dan Ruzanowski of the San Jose Sharks, and Perry, when he was injured, did color with Dan in the first year, right? So
I had forgot all about that. You're absolutely right.
Right? There's Perry Berezan making hockey better again. Directly responsible for this year's Foster Hewitt Award winner.
He'll have to be there for the ceremony in November.
If I'll be disappointed if Dan doesn't dedicate the award to Perry. That's the only logical thing to do.
I'm going to send Dan a note and recommend that he do that.
Absolutely.
And thanks for letting me know, because I'd forgotten all about that. I remember the old Cow Palace there in San Francisco.
Right.
Where they played their first couple of years. Perry was injured and he was doing color. That's right.
I just remember there's a story, and it's Perry's to tell. I really shouldn't. But anyway, I'm halfway through it anyway. They're working together, and Dan says, "Oh, and it's offside by the San Jose Sharks." And Perry goes, "No, Dan, that's actually icing," and everything. And Dan covered his mic, and Perry's mic, "Don't ever correct me." So, anyway, the little things that keep my little mind occupied. Pete, good to talk to you. We'll do it again in a couple of weeks, and we're going to have a lot to talk about then, too.
Oh, yeah, there's lots going on between now and then. That's for sure, Rob. Take care and enjoy the weekend.
I will. Peter Maher, everybody, the legend. And I was lucky enough to be there in way back in I guess 06 when Pete went into the hall, got recognized by the Hall of Fame. It's different. The broadcasters are not, you're not entered into the Hall of Fame. You know what? The hell with it. Let me do this. Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. They present our guests. 76 years in Calgary. Check them out. Head on down there. See what's going on. There's one location open in the summer, 4 in the winter. McLeod Trail by Chinook Center. Eric Duhatschek from The Athletic joins us, and he can take the marbles out of my mouth. The media members are, what's the difference? They are, they're not honored members, right?
Correct. They are media honorees, which is a distinction from full honored membership. So
correct.
So yeah, there's, well, and it's funny. I think the Hall of Fame, the actual Hall of Fame selection committee meets next Wednesday. It's going to be very interesting to see what the class of 2023 looks like. Internally at The Athletic, we're doing a project that we do every year where we create our own shadow Hall of Fame committee, publish our results before the actual Hall of Fame, and then see how we do compared to the real Hall. But yeah, if you go to the Hall of Fame in Toronto, in the Great Hall there where they display the Stanley Cup, the honored members each have a plaque there, and then on the side, to one side, is the media wall of fame, I guess, for lack of a better purpose. But it's, you are a media honoree. That's what it says on your blazer, as opposed to honored member. So there is a distinction. It's not full membership, but basically it's the highest honor that you
Sure.
can win as a hockey writer or a hockey broadcaster, and it's because it's a peer award, Rob. I mean,
Yep.
the thing that I think all of us value the most is the people that read us, edit us, compete against us, are the ones that vote on these awards. And so to get a recognition from your colleagues who know your work better than anyone, there is no higher accolade in my view. So that when I won the Elmer Ferguson in 2001, it was a complete shock, and I mean, nothing professionally has ever topped that in my mind. So
right. Well, and my moment came last year when our good friend went in and you inducted him, and Al Morganti, and you name dropped the show. So that was my Hall of Fame moment. I've got it. I'm happy. I can die happy.
The beauty of today, as opposed to 2001, is that those things are available on YouTube. So if you start looking for my speech, you'd have a hard time finding it. I don't think there's any record of it anywhere. But yes, Al Morganti's was widely available, and he spoke really well about the evolution of the industry and what makes this job so appealing on a lot of levels. It's the social side of it, right? It's interviewing players. It's the camaraderie you develop within the news organizations that you work for. I mean, there's just a whole lot of things to be thankful for when you kind of reach that moment in your career. So, and I always encourage people to go down to the Hockey Hall of Fame. Like, if you care enough about hockey and you haven't seen the Hall of Fame, and you're drifting into Toronto for whatever reason. I had a friend that went in for a business trip and said, what should I do? And I said, go to the Hall of Fame. And this is someone that didn't really care that much about hockey, but I said, this is part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. It's part of who we are as Canadians. Everyone should go in and see it. And it's fun. It's interactive. It's not just a dry collection of memorabilia and such. There is great memorabilia in there too, but there's fun things to do for the kids. And the other thing I would say, Rob, if we want to get off this topic eventually, is that this is the time of year when I get very itchy to be back on the committee, because if you're on the main selection committee. So I joined the main selection committee in 2004, but there are term limits, right? So you can only be a U.S. president twice, and you can only serve 5 3-year terms on the selection committee, and then you rotate off. So in 2018, my 5th 3-year term came to an end. Cassie Campbell-Pascal replaced me on the committee. I'm sure she does a great job, but of course I'm not there, and everyone is bound by secrecy, so I don't really know what goes on in those conversations. And I think the further removed I am, the less feel I have for what is going to happen next. The first year afterwards, who came close, and then when somebody gets elected, it's like, okay, yeah, because that person came close. But it's now 5 years. The committee has had a fairly significant turnover. This year, 2 new members. Our friend Michael Farber also reached the 15-year term limit, so he's gone. He's been replaced by Scott Morrison, the longtime sports editor of the Toronto Sun, who was with me on Satellite Hot Stove for a number of years, and then worked for Rogers for a lot of years. So he's replaced Michael, and Joe Sakic is on the committee for the first time, and he's replaced Bobby Clark, who retired. So Bobby only served 9 years, 3 3-year terms, and then just voluntarily decided he didn't want to continue. But they've added Joe Sakic to the mix, and that's he'll be really good. He's a really smart, introspective, knowledgeable guy. Doesn't speak loudly, but I'm sure that when Joe does speak, his voice will carry a lot of weight in that room. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see it. If anybody cares, it's one of those years where there aren't a ton of slam dunk first year male players that are eligible. Henrik Lundqvist is at the top of the list. I'm fairly certain he'll be a first time Hall of Famer. But after that, it's Justin Williams, really good career. Jay Bouwmeester, really good career. Corey Crawford, really good career. Nobody that screams slam dunk the way like a Nicholas Lidstrom would have, or a Ray Bourque would have. And so in years where there is only one, then that's when the second chance candidates get an opportunity. And And I'm just wondering, because my hobby horse was always goaltenders, right? That I think they are notoriously underrepresented. I think that's just a statistical conclusion. I believe I was looking it up the other day. I think in the past 30 years, I think only 7 goaltenders have been elected, and that includes Roberto Luongo last year. So I think Lundqvist will get in this year, but I also think Mike Vernon, Chris Osgood, Curtis Joseph, Tom Barrasso, even Corey Crawford on some level. I think these are people that will all have to be considered. And I wonder if this might be the year of the goaltender, just because I do think that, there's been a really good catch-up moment for the Hall in terms of European players from an earlier era that have been elected in the last couple of years. And I think it's time to catch up on goalies that have been overlooked. And again, I wonder if our old friend Mike Vernon is going to be one of those people. I think he should be. To be honest, I wrote a piece a couple of years ago on The Athletic when we were doing Hall of Fame snubs, making the case for Mike. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at it, but certainly one is head-to-head against Patrick Waugh and Grant Fuhr, his 2 peers. He had a winning record against both. I think both of those men would support Mike's candidacy, even though they were great rivals of his. And then the other is that, he did win 1 Conn Smythe as a playoff MVP playing for Detroit in 1997. And I can tell you, in 1989, it was a 50-50 coin flip between Mike Vernon and Al MacKinnis for the Conn Smythe. And we never know the exact results of the votes, but I'm told it was very, very close, and it could have gone either way. And I know that there are people, that felt that just because of the way Vernon played and allowed the Flames to have that great escape in the first round against Vancouver, that should have tilted the scale in his favor. So one way or another, he has had exceptional playoff numbers. He was a terrific regular season goaltender. His pure raw statistical numbers are not as as good as the goalies that played in the dead puck era, but he came into the National Hockey League in the 1985-86 season, and I believe that was 1985 was the highest scoring year in the history of the National Hockey League. So, Grant Fuhr's numbers for that first 10 years of his career weren't great, and Patrick Waugh, same thing. And so I don't know. It's been a long time. I never want to make predictions because even when I was on the committee, they were always wrong. But I do. It feels like it could be his year. It feels like it could be his year.
I don't understand how we can say, and we celebrated this, that Grant didn't matter with Grant Fuhr how many. He always let in one last, right? That was the thing about Grant Fuhr. Sure. And the thing that I've said about Mike Vernon, and it applies to Fuhr, it applies to Patrick Waugh, but it really applies to Mike Vernon. He played in 2 different eras of goaltending. He came in as a stand-up flopper and left as a butterfly goalie and won in both of those eras. Like, he won cups in both of those eras. That has to account for something. And he would not have been drafted for the last 2 decades because he was under 6 feet. Right?
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. No, I mean, goalies like that would have been weaned out long before he ever got there. But remember, that was the era where, Mike Palmateer played, Darren Pang played. Like, I mean,
but 80 games, let's not get crazy.
Okay. I'm not saying he's a Hall of Famer, but I know
the
point is that you could play in the National Hockey League as recently as Darren Pang's career, because he was a rookie in Joe Nieuwendyke's year. I remember. That's right. Because Darren Pang used to go around. He was as glib then as a first-year pro as he is now on television. And I remember talking to him once, and he started his own Darren Pang for the Calder campaign, and it was Pang, easier to spell than Nieuwendyke. I mean, that's
brilliant. That's brilliant. I like that.
I think he got in the top 3. I think it was Joe, Ray Shepard, and Darren Pang, if I remember. But anyway, it was. But okay, so that's not that long ago, and he's 5'5", and he played in the National Hockey League. And you had a really good junior career. So you're right. The position has changed. I'm hoping that a little bit of what your UC Saros is doing, and maybe what we're going to see from Dustin Wolf in the future with Calgary, that notion that you have to be 6'4" or 6'2" or 6'6" to play goal. I hope that goes away. That skilled smaller players can still make it, but we'll see. We're in for sure in a transitional period for that position.
Last one, and we got to get to lots of news, but what's the one thing that would surprise people on the outside about being an elector or selector in the process of the Hall of Fame?
Well, what would surprise people? That's an interesting way of framing the question. I would tell you that what surprised me when I first started was how intense that 4 to 5 hours is. You're in a room with a lot of very opinionated, knowledgeable people, and people who are not afraid to challenge you on things. So, the world feels a little bit namby-pamby sometimes, and everyone is afraid of everyone's shadow and is afraid of saying this thing and the next thing. And in that room, people are willing to say, to lay it on the line.
All right.
Yeah, and I got to be careful. I'm not allowed to say what is actually said in those meetings because of confidentiality, but I think I can characterize the tone and not breach confidentiality. And I would say that it's fascinating. It's draining. At the end of it, you feel like you've run a half a marathon or something like that. And sometimes it's frustrating. Like you feel that you have built a strong case for a particular candidate. It should be clear in everyone's mind that this person belongs in the Hall of Fame, and it requires 14 votes out of 18, or and you end up a couple short, and it's like, you've convinced 2/3 of the people in the room that you've got a viable candidate, but because the bar is set so high, you don't get in unless you get 14 out of 18. I think that's misunderstood. I would say the two things that are most misunderstood about the process is how hard it is to get 14 out of 18 votes of people who are very strong-willed and single-minded. So that's one. And then the other thing that people sometimes don't necessarily realize or understand is what you referenced before, that the committee changes, right?
Yeah.
So since I've been gone, I think there are 7 new members of the committee. Scotty Bowman retired the year before me. I think Coley Campbell the year after. So there's at least a third of the committee that I didn't even serve with at the time. And so they all bring their own perspective that's different from the 6 people that rotated off the committee. And this is my answer to when people ask, well, why did Eric Lindros get in after 10 years? Well, the committee that was in place when Eric Lindros was first eligible, and the committee that was in place when Eric Lindros was actually elected. I mean, there are 10 or 12 new faces, new voices, new thoughts. And so, and that's part of why they rotate people in and off to keep it fresh. You've got, people whose careers, are fairly fresh and have a memory of playing against the candidates that are coming up. And they can say, here's what it was like to face Henrik Lundqvist, but there are also people there that can say, here's what it was like to face Mike Vernon. But I think that the evolution of the committee is something that people don't understand, because I get that 10 times every year. Well, why now? Like, why now after 10 years does this guy get in? Well, that it's as simple as that. The committee is just different than it was 10 years ago.
Let's get into some news. We'll start with the local hockey heroes, and we'll go chronologically. Ryan Huska introduced as the 24th coach of the Calgary Flames on Monday. Another, went through the system, did everything was asked, gets the promotion. Thoughts on what you've heard, what you think of Ryan Huska as a choice?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that I can add very much to what I said 2 weeks ago, because remember, Rob, we talked about this, and the question was, who do you think it should be? And I said, I think it should be Ryan Huska. And my thought was, well, a few things. One, I always appreciate a candidate that has touched every rung of the ladder going up and is waiting for an opportunity and is ready for that opportunity. So if you look at his record in junior hockey, you look at his record as a head coach in minor pro, you look at the last 5 years of being an assistant coach in the National Hockey League, those are the necessary steps. That was the whole thing we were talking about with Mitch Love. Like, Mitch Love is going to be an NHL head coach at some point. There's no doubt in my mind. I think there's no doubt in other people's minds. But I do believe that, and I think Craig Conroy even said this at the press conference, that, he needs to be in the NHL as an assistant coach, learn the practice rinks, the coaches' offices, the hotels, no matter whether you believe it or not, it is different. It is different managing NHL players. It is different managing an NHL lifestyle. And so I think that that's the only box that he has left to check. And once he checks that box, people will be lining up to hire him the way they were lining up to hire Spencer Carberry in Washington. So Now, then there's the question of the internal candidate. Well, what I really like about that is that both Craig Conroy and Ryan Huska have an insider's knowledge of the team and what makes the players tick. And the difficulty with grafting an outside voice on is it takes time for those people to figure it out. I remember having this conversation with Barry Trotz once. Barry's point is that coaching is about managing people, but relationships don't happen overnight. And so you can begin with the hi, how are you, or the get acquainted lunch, but you only really get to know someone when you work with them, day in and day out. You're on the ice with them day in and day out. You're in the dressing room with them. You see what motivational buttons work and what doesn't work. And that takes time. Just look at Florida. How long did it take Paul Maurice to get that message to sink in? It eventually did sink in. It's not that you can't have success as a first-year coach going onto a new team, but it helps to have the breadth of knowledge that Ryan Huska has. And I was very impressed. I made a point of going to the press conference, even though I wasn't really writing about it, but I wanted to see how he carried himself. And I thought he did an outstanding job of communicating. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Here's what I hope to learn. Acknowledging that, tells me that he knows, what the job is. He has specific ideas about what he wants to tackle and what he wants to do differently. His voice is, just by its nature, is going to be different from the voice that he replaces Daryl Sutter. That's the third or fourth time I've walked into the Saddle Dome since the season ended, and it does feel like a different place. There's a positive energy because the two key decision makers, the new coach and the new general manager, are really positive people. I also think there's a lot of backbone there. I was asked to do a quick news hit on Ryan Huska by one of our editors. And I said, here's how I would describe him because we have to do it very concisely. Firm but fair. I said, firm but fair. Keep that in mind. I said, because, when you look at the coaching spectrum, you can have the old school kick butt coach over, the slave driver coach at the one end. And then the other extreme, of course, is the players coach who's, pals with the coach. And you hear the players use a nickname to describe the coach. And you can just tell that he's, he's there with his group. Right. And I think that neither extreme is ideal. I think what you want is the best of both, right? So firm but fair. And every player will tell you, or most will tell you, that as long as they know where they stand, they can deal with criticism, feedback, whatever term you want. It's the coaches that from that earlier era that thought that motivating players by keeping them guessing worked. Well, that might have worked in the 80s. It probably did work in the 80s. It probably worked in the 1970s. It doesn't work in 2023. And so I think that just in terms of the way he comports himself and the way he won't be a pushover, but on the other hand, he's not going to be cracking the whip every day too. That's the type of coach you want. And you had somebody internally that checked those boxes. So, I'm on record as saying that I think this is a very good hire, and let's see what happens in October.
Yeah, interesting to hear how you described the press conference. Just watching it, it was crisp and professional. That's what I came away with. Crisp and professional. It wasn't memorable in the sense of, big words and platitudes and things like that. But to your point, came in, said the things that he believes and answered the questions. And I personally, I love the connection to the alumni. I thought that was a nice little touch too. It just felt right.
Sure, exactly. And you know what? You're probably not going to get a lot of one-liners, but that's okay. The job is not. They're not hiring a comedian. They're hiring a hockey coach.
Yeah, right? We had Bob Hartley. No, we were good.
And that was good too, by the way.
Sure. Oh, sure. He filled a book. And then yesterday, I don't know if we call it the worst kept secret or, inevitable or whatever, but Jerome Iginla is back as a special assistant to the general manager. This, it almost has two lives to it, right? Here's arguably the best player in the organization's history coming back, but it's the relationship between him and the general manager that I think is the real story here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, I agree, and so one of the, I'll eventually weigh in on this, but one of my first thoughts was that, and I asked Craig Conroy this, when I look at NHL front offices, a lot of times there is too much groupthink. And the groupthink comes from the fact that the general manager goes out and hires a bunch of his pals. And he does that because he trusts them. So he trusts their feedback. He trusts their hockey knowledge. He feels comfortable in a room of people that he has had a long association with. The problem with that is that sometimes everybody thinks the same way. And what you need is one or two people in the room to say, well, wait a second, I disagree. I think we need to go in a different direction, and here's why. Then it's up to the general manager to weigh the pros and cons of any argument that's put for him, and he's the one that ultimately makes the decision. But if you remember, the beauty of Craig's relationship with Jerome is that they, as good as friends as they were, they often disagreed. You saw it on the benches. You saw it when they, when we were doing all the profiles of Jerome when he retired and went in the Hall of Fame, the stories that they told on each other and how they would compete against each other. So this is not that group thing. This is a relationship that has been around for a long time, but it involves pushback. And I think that's healthy. That's really healthy. So and it will be probably a transition because as or was reported, Jerome will continue to coach at Rink Academy for another year and then transition into a more full-time position. I think really all this does is formalize something that was happening already, because that was my question to Craig. Was that I said, well, haven't you been talking to him? Oh yeah, no, I've been talking to him, and I would have continued to talk to him, but they wanted to formalize the relationship and then see where it goes. And I think that it will be different in 12 months time when he can devote more time to the job and less time to coaching. And then it may evolve after that, because the one thing that I think that Jerome has said, several times for the records, is that he really does enjoy coaching, and he might be even enjoying it more than he thought he would. And so, is the future, like behind the bench as an assistant or something like that at some point? I don't know. That's just speculation. But I think about, someone like Ron Francis, who runs Seattle now and eventually became the general manager in Carolina. For a time, he was an assistant on Paul Maurice's staff. A lot of people have done that just to check the box of what that's like. Like, if the whole idea is to educate yourself about the business side of hockey and the administrative side of hockey, you can do that by scouting. If Jerome's sitting in Kelowna, if there's somebody they want to see from the Western League that's coming through, can you go to the game tonight? We're doing a tour of college free agents. We have to bid against other teams. We have to, entice them to come to our city. Can you come and from your perspective as a Calgary Flame, explain why this is a city and an organization that you want to join? I mean, he can do a lot of different things, and I think that's why the title is special advisor, because then Craig can ask him to help me here, help me there, and then over time, part-time probably becomes full-time, and then Jerome can decide how much time he wants to put into it, and how badly he wants to stay in. The one thing I would say that I had a terrible take about 25 or 30 years ago that proved to be completely wrong, because at the point where salary escalation just went bananas, I think I wrote a column saying that the problem with this is that no star player then will ever want to become a manager, because he'll have made $50 million, $80 million, $100 million. Why go to the trouble and the heartache of being general manager, assistant general manager, coach, assistant coach, when you don't have to work? And what I failed to realize was that the reason these people became the great players was because they were passionate about the game, because they were lifers in the game. And even though they don't have to work for the money, they still want to be part of the game. And so that's why you have the Joe Zackiks and the Rob Blakes and the Brendan Shanahans and all of those people still in the game. They don't have to work. They're doing it because they want to. And that was like a complete miscalculation on my part, which, I've slowly over time come to realize that no, it's the opposite, that people who care about the game, they don't want to leave the game. I mean, Wayne Gretzky is the best example. When he went back to coaching, it was because he missed the game. And the thing that he missed the most about the game was being in the dressing room with the players. And so for a while anyway, he got a chance to do that again because he missed the game. Why is he on a TNT panel? He doesn't have to be. You can just do commercials for betting sites and make a fortune. But he wants to still have a role in the game. And when the commissioner's there at the Stanley Cup final and sitting beside him on the set, it reminds him of, the days when they used to win Stanley Cups in Edmonton. So anyway.
The general manager and the special advisor are going to have some work to do. Your colleague, Pierre Lebrun, writing today in The Athletic that Noah Hanifin has expressed that he's not interested in signing another deal here in Calgary. That explains, I guess, if you will, why his name has popped up there. Disappointing to me. I really like Noah Hanifin as a defenseman, but we all knew they had the 7 players that could be free agents next year. There was going to be work, and that work is starting to come. Some of it's beginning to show some clarity here.
Yeah, well, no, I think that's a good take by you, Rob, and I would say that here, to me, this was always the challenge that Craig Conroy was going to face. So I think that this new regime that's in place, I think is going to be very attractive to a lot of the players that were having some issues. So everything that was said in the exit meetings, I want to wait to see what the path forward looks like until I commit. And I think the message there was, you need to make some changes. So I think they've made positive changes. But the reality is, if you're, let's use Noah Hanifin as an example, but you could probably say the same for Lindholm and maybe even for Bachman. They approve of the new general manager. They probably approve of the coaching hire, but they're at a point where they're real close to UFA. The salary cap is probably 1 year or 2 years away from really going up. So if you sign an extension right now, you're dealing with, the 4th or 5th year of $1 million cap rise, and teams they're hamstrung. They could, they might want to give you more money, but they don't have the money to give you. It's just the nature of the beast. But the escrow payment will be paid off by the end of this year, and so I'm expecting, a $5 million jump. I think the cap will be up $10 million by the summer of 2025. So again, it's why Gavrikov signs a 2-year contract, because his agent is seeing the same thing. There'll be a lot more money in the system in 2 years' time, and there will be more money in the system next summer already. And so if you're Hanifin or Lindholm, what do you gain? Well, you gain security. If you have a poor year or an injury that reduces your market value, then you've gambled and lost. But the reality is, if you have another good year, you don't have to sign this summer. You can wait to see. October 5th, puck drops. Flames are really good right out of the start. There's a positive energy, a positive environment. I'm liking it. Well, you can sign an extension then.
Yep.
Or you can wait to see how the whole season goes and then test the market. So I think it's a very reasonable position for the players to take. In their shoes, maybe I would take the same position. The problem, of course, if you're the general manager, is that flies against the philosophy that was outlined at his introductory press conference, which is, we let Johnny Gaudreau go for nothing, and you just can't let an asset walk, right? And so without getting something in return. So then it becomes, okay, so what can you get for him? And when is the appropriate time to trade a player? Is it before the draft? Well, if you trade him before the draft, then you have a chance to get picks in a very deep 2023 draft. So that's a good thing. Do you trade him during the summer? Once the free agency air is clear and teams find that they didn't get the player that they wanted, they're circling back to you, because I was hoping to sign, Orlov, but I didn't get him. So, I need a top 4 guy and you have a guy available, I'll give you player X. Or do you wait until the trade deadline? Because the price for rentals has been ridiculous these last few years. And it's possible that you might even get more for a top 4 defenseman like Hanifin or a true number 1 center like Lindholm at the trade deadline. The risk there, of course, is you're having a good season, and then can you afford to trade a contributing player off the roster, and what's the message you send? So see, it's this complex, nuanced question that doesn't really have an obvious, easy answer. But I think that this is where hard decisions are going to have to be made, and I think that Craig Conroy is capable of making those, because I think he's got lots of backbone. But if your first major trade is moving a guy out just because he might not sign, that's the first move is a calculated risk, and then we'll see where it goes. So, but I look at the depth on their defense. I think Zadorov can play higher up the depth chart. I also think that as you start moving pieces around, you might be able to find, somebody that can fill in. So I think Hanifin has value. I think he has at least first round value, at the very least first round value. Could he get a package like Alex DeBrincat got from Ottawa? Maybe. Depends on the team. People are talking about, how Buffalo could really use someone like him, how there's a connection between Hanifin and Don Granato. Buffalo has like a really nice young defense core coming. Dahlin is probably going to sign for $10 million a year for 8 years on July 1st, or when he's eligible to do it. Owen Power is coming, but getting like a Hanifin type in there to supplement that group, that would be really good. And Buffalo does have futures that you might be able to to trade for. So interesting time. And I do think, to your point, between now and the draft, and then that period between the draft and free agency, and then then free agency, and then the period after free agency, I think we're going to see a significant number of moves. So today is what, 16th of June. By the 16th of July, the depth charts that you and I have for all of our teams are going to look dramatically different for about 10 to 12 teams, I would say.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think part of that too is, you mentioned Orlov, who now really, I guess, becomes the big free agent out there. It's not a great free agency class, right? So if you're going to do upgrades, you're going to have to horse trade, right?
Yeah. I think that's fair. So, like everyone overpays in free agency, like I thought, so Damon Severson was a pending UFA out of New Jersey. Columbus trades for his rights, signs him 8 years for like $50 million. So I must not be watching enough New Jersey Devils games, because it didn't look like a $50 million player to me. So, but I would be a terrible general manager right now, because every one of these contracts makes no sense. It's like, are you kidding? For almost $8 million for Jesper Bratt, really? I would be a terrible general manager. It would be like, no, I'm not doing that. So
I don't know. Let's talk. Arbitration's always a funny one, but let's talk about it. So Ottawa will take DeBrincat to arbitration. He's asked to be traded. I think there's a reason for this. Eric, can you kind of walk me through it?
It's so complicated. I don't. If you ask for a 2-year ARB award, you can get him signed for, I think, $7.75 instead of $9, which is the qualifying offer. And so
gotcha.
there would be a way of getting his number down a little bit until he becomes an unrestricted free agent. Actually, I guess in his case, you can't ask for a 2-year award because he's only a year away from UFA. So it's a dense, complicated thing. I was researching it myself, and I thought, okay, this is when you need to call the Mike Burks of the world and say, okay, how does that work?
How does this work? I know,
but there is a mechanism, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Flames filed for arbitration with Matthew Tkachuk for a similar thing, just to, and I think the other thing is, I'm going to be talking myself into a corner and give out false information, which I don't want to do. But there is a reason for doing that, because it allows them to potentially, if they have to hang on to him, to get him at a lower number. But I do think too that they will, in the same way that, Calgary's probably going to have to listen on Hanifin, that Winnipeg is having to listen on Dubois and Hellebuck, Ottawa's going to have to listen on DeBrincat. And here's what I will tell you. I think the general managers that are in that position, they prefer that to the uncertainty, because if someone gives you a definitive no, that's better than a maybe, because maybe is the Gaudreau message. In fact, I would characterize the Gaudreau message as maybe, probably, or maybe possibly. And so I think that held out a lot of hope for the people that were running the team, that he would sign. That he was interested in exploring free agency, but he had an attachment to, and then all of a sudden, 11 minutes before the deadline, it's like, no, I'm testing the market. And so you would rather have, what Matthew Tkachuk did, which is like, here's who I'm prepared to play for. Here's what I'm prepared to sign for. You can get more assets back this way than you can when I leave for nothing. And so to me, that's actually doing the team a courtesy to to say it. If you know you're not going to sign, and you feel any loyalty to the organization that you've played for any number of years, then I think it behooves you to say it. If you're not sure, you're not sure. Then you return and play, and maybe then you can sign them during the season. But yeah, I mean, I look at the number of, to your point, free agency isn't great, so you're probably going to have to go into the market. There's some really good players that are going to be available, and then it's just a matter of what are people prepared to give up to get them.
Well, there's another defenseman available. While you and I have been talking, the Vancouver Canucks are taking advantage of the buyout window and are going to pay Oliver Ekman-Larsson for the next 8 years.
Wow.
There's a team that I don't know how you get out of all of this mess, right? So they pay 88%, and Coyotes play 12% of the buyout costs.
Yeah. Well, it's a 2-year plan to extricate yourself from the hole. They dug this hole, and I think that they're blaming it largely on the previous regime, and I think in the case of Ekman-Larsson, what an interesting player, right, Rob? When Austin Matthews was available to be drafted at the top of the first round in 2016, I think it was. Ekman-Larsson was one of the top defensemen in the National Hockey League, playing for Arizona. And there was talk, I think it was just made up stuff, but, would Arizona consider trading Ekman-Larsson to Toronto so they could draft Austin Matthews, and Austin Matthews could save the franchise? And I think I think both sides said, no, we're not doing that. But I'm thinking to myself, well, why wouldn't Arizona do that if it was offered? I don't think it was ever offered. So now, fast forward to today, you've got one player that's probably going to sign a contract extension after July 1st that will make him the highest paid player in the game, and another player who is on the unemployment line and probably going to, if he plays at all in North America, is going to play for a very small sum of money. And I can't say that I've watched him enough. I think it's really hard when a player becomes a whipping boy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson did, to really evaluate what he can do. I think about Eric Goodbranson. He became a whipping boy, and then he came to Calgary and played pretty well. There's a part of me that thinks that used the right way, priced right, that Oliver Ekman-Larsson is going to help somebody. It just, it was just too much money, for a guy that, was not playing, top pair minutes anymore. And just was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong for 2 years in the organization. That's a lot of weight for a player to carry. You're trying to play a game at top speed, and you get booed, and it just, if anyone needs a fresh start, there's a player that does. And he's a player I've always liked. So, and he has a connection to Brad Treliving. So, you wonder if Toronto has to go shopping for an inexpensive reinforcement on the blue line. Is he someone that would go there? Has a relationship with Brad, presumably has a relationship with Shane Doan. So if Hanifin moves from here, is he somebody
it's
that you
not?
would add? It's
kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah,
in a way, right?
Yeah, well, they looked at him, and there was just too much money, and I think the biggest problem with that trade was that when Arizona made the trade, they only ate, what was it, 1/8 of it or something like that. It was a very insignificant amount of money, and that'll be a part of the conversation that the teams have this summer as they're trying to move on from some of these high price contracts. We had a story on our website this week about Erik Karlsson and 6 possible destinations, and in every case it was here's what Erik Karlsson can bring to this team. And here are the financial hoops that they would have to jump through in order to make it happen. And at the end of reading it, it's like, wow, those are really strong, consistent, expensive financial hoops. And as good a player as he is, and he'll probably win the Norris Trophy, that contract might be close to untradeable. Of course, I thought Cal Peterson's contract was untradeable, and Rob Blake managed to trade it. So nothing, I guess, is untradeable anymore. So.
Last one before you let you go, and maybe it speaks to the era we're in, maybe it just speaks to how forgettable it was, but there was a Stanley Cup champion decided earlier this week, and it was Vegas.
Who won, by the way?
Who won? Vegas. Yeah.
Vegas. Okay. Right.
6 years in. Great local story in Aiden Hill.
Yeah.
But it sure kind of felt like outside of Nevada, this one just didn't resonate. Mostly because I just don't think Florida was competitive in this series.
No, it was, I hate to say it, it was a terrible Stanley Cup final, a lot of one-sided games. There wasn't a lot of mystery there. When Tkachuk got hurt, the Keegan Colasar hit basically ended the series right then and there. So, my column today weighs in on Vegas from the perspective of what an unorthodox blueprint. And how do you follow that blueprint? Because think about the previous champion, Colorado Avalanche. So their nucleus: MacKinnis first overall, Landeskog second overall, Maher fourth overall, Rantanen 10th overall. Draft and develop, right? That was their model. Tampa before them, Steven Stamkos first overall, Hedman second overall, Kucherov a steal in the third round, Vasilevsky a first rounder. Draft and develop, right? So that is the mantra and the model for virtually every organization in the National Hockey League. Then you've got this one team that swims against the tide. Draft and develop. Without saying draft schmaff, that's they use those the players that they chose in the draft. They used draft choices as currency, but they went out and got a really expensive center in Eichel, a really expensive winger in Stone, a really expensive defenseman in Pietrangelo, and then they turned to their pro scouting department and said, "Find us, value elsewhere." And all of a sudden, Chandler Stevenson comes in and Howden comes in, and they grab Mario on waivers, and the trade that so during these playoffs, right? So we've heard all about how Marchessault and Riley Smith ended up from Florida in Vegas, and Theodore from Anaheim, and those were all the big names. So I'm looking at Colasar, who I thought was really an important figure in that series and in that entire playoff. And how did they get him? Because he wasn't a draft choice. And so the trade tree is Tampa gives Vegas the 45th pick in the draft because they wanted to unload Jason Garrison's contract. So Vegas makes Jason Garrison their selection from Tampa, and in exchange for taking Garrison and not one of their better players, they get a second round pick. Then at the draft, they trade that second round pick to Columbus because Columbus has their eye on that Alexander Texier, the player who went to France, who I think is coming back this year. And so for that second round pick, they get Keegan Colasar. So Colasar had been drafted by Columbus back in 2015. He was playing for Seattle in the WHL. He had a great playoff for Seattle from Brandon, right? So in 2017, who's the assistant general manager? It's Kelly McCrimmon from Brandon. So there's the connection. So it's not an overnight sensation. He goes to Chicago, plays in the minors, gets to the NHL. He's really only been in the NHL for a couple of years. 26, not a kid, but big, strong, tough. If you think of the identity of that Vegas team, to me, the identity came from Colasar, from Carrier, from that fourth line that just that was just so stalwart and just played so hard. And but how do you duplicate that blueprint? Their bottom 10 were better than anybody else's bottom 10. They had a real nice, skilled guys at the top. No, there's no doubting what Eichel did, what Marchessault did, what Pietrangelo meant, what Aiden Hill meant to the team. But they could roll those guys out there. As a coach that I was talking to said, they never hand off a bad shift. So does that change the way teams think? I used this as a trivia question to a few people, including our good friend Craig Button, who, by the way, got it in one. How many drafted players did they have in the lineup on the night that they won? How many drafted players?
Vegas drafted players.
Yeah.
3?
Well, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm going to tell you the answer. The answer is 1, and it was Nick Hague. Nick Hague is the only drafted player that was in the lineup. The Paul Cotter was around. There's a few guys that,
but in the lineup, yeah.
But in the lineup, contributing to this championship, 1, and they're 6 years in. So that's not like if it's Seattle, okay, you've got a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds. You wouldn't expect to have too many, but they're 6 years in. Those players in the pipeline have had a lot of time to develop. Well, they traded them all, except for one guy, right? Nick Hague. So I always get Hague and Roy confused because I think that they're both really good, really tough, really anonymous, and so important to what they did. But it was one player. So do Do you follow that model? I don't know. I don't think you can. I think we're going to see this as a unicorn kind of a construct. Although I will say this, if you want to explain what Columbus is doing this year, which nobody likes, they're trying to get hard to play against NHLers in the lineup, and they're trading futures, and nobody thinks that's a good idea. But maybe they're the first team that's trying to follow that Vegas model because it worked.
It's a copycat league.
Yeah,
right?
and they were really good in all 4 series.
I think the thing that's the anomaly that's going to jump out for me, because I think it's going to trip up a lot of people for a long time. Jonathan Quick, 3 Stanley Cup rings.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he was obviously a spare part and a cheerleader and someone that, that helped, with the tone, I guess, of and the composure in the dressing room. But he's a Hall of Famer.
Oh yeah.
He was so critical in those 2 Kings teams, and he's so competitive. But yeah, Vegas's goalie tandem next year is it going to be the 2 local kids, Thompson and Hill. Brossois walks and he's a backup. There's going to be a demand for backup goaltenders this year.
Yes, there will be.
Brossois will get a job. He'll get a contract. Probably the best, candidate in Calgary to get something meaningful in return is Dan Vladar. If you're putting Dustin Wolf in the lineup and if Markstrom is going to be your starter again, which I think he is, the number of teams that need what Dan Vladar can bring to the mix is high, and that will create hopefully a bidding war. And we'll see what he gets. But those types of guys, especially the way the playoffs were this year, where you just don't ride that one guy anymore. You need to have somebody that can come in there and play and win. And so I think that'll be interesting. But I predict it'll be Hill and Logan Thompson, right? In goal in Vegas.
Why not? It probably won't cost you much.
Yeah, Quick retires or finds a place where he can play for as the backup. I don't know if Robin Leonard will ever play again, and Brossois will have to find a home somewhere else.
Appreciate this. This was fun. When we speak next, we will be just about on the cusp of July 1st, but I suspect, to your point, I think the rosters will have begun changing by then.
Yeah, well, we'll be through the draft. I'll be back in Calgary. I am going to Nashville.
Okay,
and then right next day is July 1st, and on to that. So, yeah, this is fun as a writer, but sorry, Rob.
No, it's all good, brother.
As a writer, it's really fun, but there is a part of me that wants things to settle down a little bit.
Well, if you're going to Vegas and you want things to settle down, watch out because the Barn Burner boys are there.
Okay, all right.
So be aware. You're forewarned.
Okay, Nashville you're talking about.
Or Nashville, sorry. Yes, Nashville.
Yeah.
Boomer and Ryan and those guys will be there.
Well, I'll be steering a wide path around that.
Yes, as you should. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
There you go. Eric Duhatschek, kind enough to join us, courtesy. Well, he's from The Athletic and courtesy of Ski Cellar Snowboard. SkiCellarSnowboard.com, 76 years in Calgary. Opened their doors back in 1946, and they have 4 sets of doors to open, but only one is open in the summertime, and that's their McLeod Trail location by Chinook Center. Not just skis and snowboards. They've got clothing. They've got snow skating. They've got it all. And as I say all the time, beautiful weather right now, go dream. If you're one of those people that takes off to the mountains every winter, go dream. Do yourself a favor. Go see what's there. Check it out. It's Ski Cellar Snowboard and SkiCellarSnowboard.com. Down to the final mile for us. Oh, we haven't done this. Live from the 55 is the new podcast from Danny Austin. It's our CFL Calgary Stampeders centric podcast. The Stamps in action last night in Ottawa, winning 26-15. I won't lie to you, found this one hard to watch. Hopefully, and I think part of that is, the bull, the bull and the rider both get marked. The rider was okay. The bull was no good. Ottawa's terrible and look like they're going to be terrible all year long. Now Calgary comes home. I believe they play Saskatchewan. Big weekend in the CFL. Winnipeg in Saskatchewan tonight. Edmonton in BC tomorrow night. And we end up with Hamilton and Toronto on Sunday. So just wanted to get you caught up on that. All right, time for our final mile. Earlier in the week, the Denver Nuggets won the NBA title. The Denver Nuggets won the NBA, their first NBA, the Larry Brown Trophy, I believe. No, Larry
O'Brien.
Larry O'Brien. Larry Brown's the coach. Larry O'Brien, thank you. The Larry O'Brien Trophy. Anyway, afterwards, you get the post game scrums and the interviews and everything. There was this piece of gold, absolute gold from the Joker. Djokovic was talking, and I know he's polarizing for some NBA fans, but for me, just stick this clip right into my vein. You want to run it for me?
Yeah.
You need, if you want to be successful, you need a couple of years. You need to be a bad, then you need to be the good, and then when you're good, you need to fail, and then when you fail, you're gonna figure it out. I think the experience is something that is not what happened to you, is what you're gonna do with that. What happened to you, and. Yes, Jamal was injured. Yes, we lose the first round or second round in the playoff. I don't even remember who remembers, but. There is a process that you need to. There is a steps that you need to fill, and it's not there is no shortcuts. It's a journey, and I'm glad that I'm part of this journey.
It's a journey. You got to fail. Last year, Jamal Murray was injured. They blew out in the first round. As he said, you get bad, you get good, you fail, and I love it. I want to reinforce it. I want to scream it from the rooftops. I say it all the time. I am a product of failure. There was I think it was this clip actually, that I retweeted. We spend so much time seeking perfection in this world when really we ought to be on the other end of the spectrum, allowing our kids to fail, teaching them how to fail, teaching them how to get better after failure. And it's a great reality, but when you have a champion and we have somebody, has the world's stage at his feet, like, Djokovic did, and for him to say that, I just thought it was incredibly powerful. And the last one, and I mentioned it with Pete, tough week for us. And when I say us, I guess I'm meaning the sports media. 6 radio stations closed, AM stations went away. And one of them was in this province, Team 1260. I had just left Edmonton when the team started. I have a great deal of respect what Dave Jameson, who's a program director there for a long time, with Jason Greger, with Dustin Nielsen, Jason Strudwick. There was some real talent. I believe actually some of the guys from Oilers Nation probably had touch base, and it was part of the sports ecosystem. It's the reality, I guess, that we're dealing with in the media business. And this isn't a woe is the media, but it is a cautionary tale. Let's call it for what it is here. Bell Media is not losing money. Bell Media is not making enough money in their eyes. These may have been money-losing ventures, I suppose, but overall, they're still making money. I feel like if my dad were alive, he'd whack me in the back of the head and call me a communist, because every time you start talking about the evils of money, there's a whole bunch of people that, you can't say that. You can't say, you socialist, you can't say that. I like a good paycheck as much as the next guy. I would like to be financially secure as much as the next person. I get that, but that's not what this is anymore. We have a really, really, really dangerous situation building here. The other part of the Bell cuts, away from my friends and colleagues and things like that, people I didn't know, were the news parts. And I'm really, really concerned about the lack of news coverage. I'm not talking about editorials. I'm not talking about opinions. I'm talking about just the news, the facts, the story. Here it is. You interpret it. You read it. You take what you need. There was an absolute tragedy, which we addressed off the top of this program today. And I texted somebody and they said, "What are you talking about?" Almost 24 hours later. And I said, "You haven't heard." And there's no more newspaper at your door. There's no more dinner time news. There is, but nobody's really watching it like we used to. It's dangerous. It is dangerous. And this isn't me shaking my fist at the cloud and telling the snowflake to get off my lawn. We need to think a little bit about how we are consuming our media. It goes all the way back to when we attached the monetary value and started doing ratings on newscasts and saying, well, people are tuning out for this. They shouldn't be entertainment products, but they have. They've been turned into entertainment products. They're treated like entertainment products. What we're learning is they are really a connection to our community. And yes, we love our entertainment, and yes, we love our celebrities, and we love our shouting, and we love our yelling, but we also need our media. And I know it's not a popular thing to say, but maybe in some cases we do need some government intervention to come in and make sure that we consistently have access to media. I understand the internet. I get that. But it's given rise to false narratives. It's given rise to conspiracy theory. It's given rise to all of these things. But what it has done is eroded the news that we need. Again, God bless Bell, God bless Rogers, but they're not doing anybody any favors. But they're also reacting to a world market, a global economy, all of those things. This is a sports show. I don't want to end it on a downer. I will say this. Tip of the hat to all of those guys that did yeoman work in Ottawa and everywhere else in Edmonton on the TSN flagships. Am I worried about the station? Yeah, I am. I'm concerned that AM radio is going away. I'm concerned. And hey, it's not supported. It's not supported. I understand all that, but we need our local information. So hopefully we can be a little bit of that on a good day. Thanks to our outstanding producer, Jack. Thanks to Peter Maher. Thanks to Eric Duhatschek. And, of course, thanks to you for spending your time with us today. It is Danny Austin and Cammie Kepke coming up on Monday. I'll be back with you next Wednesday. The Barn Burner crew will be in Nashville next week for the draft. So, Dean, Ryan, is Rhett going too?
I don't know. I don't think Rhett knows what he's doing.
Is Rhett across the border yet? Is he still being held?
He went across to Canada to get a hockey stick.
Yeah.
But then he didn't end up getting the stick, and then he went back. So,
but he's across the border. He's back safe in the United States?
He's in the United States, safe.
Okay, that's the only thing. I don't want anybody going home this weekend concerned about the whereabouts and the safety of one Rhett Warner. If you can, a couple of Calgary Surge games this weekend. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care of each other. Oh, don't forget, tomorrow's All Sport One day for kids. So you'll see us out in the community, hopefully finding a new favorite sport for a bunch of kids 7 to 17. That's going to be pretty cool tomorrow. Have a great weekend, everybody.
There's two sides to every coin. Then there's a